Hello world! Welcome to Learning Java, one byte at a time. This is video 21 in a tutorial series geared at bringing the wonderful wide world of Java to those with little or no programming experience. Continuing on with developing our car Bluebook app, the next file we're going to be writing is going to be the CarDB class, or the car database class, and this resides in the database layer of our program architecture, and it will be in charge of the file retrieval and storage of the car objects that we're going to be creating with our car Bluebook app. However, before we begin writing this class file, it's important that we cover two concepts that are crucial to the execution of this program. The first concept is going to be error handling, and the next one is going to be file writing. Now, since file writing uses error handling to operate correctly, we're going to start with error handling. Now, you've noticed in past videos we've had compilation errors and runtime errors, and you'll notice that Java refers to errors as exceptions, and that whenever an exception occurs, Java throws the exception, attempts to tell us on which line the exception occurred, and does some sort of light debugging and troubleshooting to help us try to figure out how we can improve it or how we can fix it. Now, what tends to happen is that whenever Java throws an exception, it crashes the program in order to give us the necessary text to help us debug the situation. But more often than not, having the program crash whenever an exception is thrown is not the ideal operation. And so it's much more useful to do the error handling yourself through code. And so you'll try to perform an operation that's likely to throw an exception, and then rather than have Java crash the program and throw the exception to the console, you're going to try to catch the exception and handle it yourself. And this is the nature of error handling. It allows the program in most cases to continue running, maybe solicit the user for a different kind of input, or whatever the case may be, but it just looks like a much cleaner operation. And so we'll jump in here to Notepad++, and we're going to go ahead and open up a class file called errorhandler.java, and we'll begin writing something in which we're going to intentionally throw an error. We're going to look at the nature of the error, and then we're going to write some code to figure out the best way to sort of catch that error that makes our program a little bit more polished. And so we'll start by importing the scanner utility because we're going to need to have some user input. And then we'll declare a class called errorhandler. Now we're going to need to have our scanner object, so let's go ahead and declare a public static scanner that we're going to call in. And we'll use the new keyword to construct the scanner, and it's looking for input from the system. Next, we're going to go ahead and write an array of strings. So we'll have a public static string array, and we'll call this words, and we'll go ahead and actually assign the values right now. And that should be good just for our testing purposes. Next, we'll go ahead and declare our main method. And inside the main method, we're just going to call one simple method called getIt. And this is going to be what sets in motion the execution of the program. And so getIt's going to accept no parameters. It's just going to be a simple method. And we'll go ahead and write that method over here. Now in getIt, we're going to ask the user for input, and based on their input, we're going to print out to the screen which one of the words in the array it is that they've chosen. We'll do a blank print line here just for formatting purposes. And this will just be a print statement, not a print line statement, because we're going to ask the user for input. And then we're going to use the scanner object to accept the next integer they may enter. We've set it equal to an integer that we've called index, and then we'll simply print out to the system which element in the array they've chosen based on the integer they enter. And then after that, we'll call it good at that. And so the keen among you will probably already know which one of these errors we're likely to encounter. I mean, what if the user enters a character instead of an integer? Or in the case that we're going to actually throw the exception, what if they enter an integer that references an element of the array that actually doesn't exist, like element 7? So let's go ahead and save this and run it. And it compiles fine, and we'll go ahead and run it. It says choose an element. So if I choose 3, it says that I have chosen element 3. Okay, so this is pretty basic. Let's try a couple more just to be sure. I've chosen element 1, and I've chosen element 5. Okay, great. So we'll clear the screen. Let's run this one more time. Now let's intentionally choose an element that is outside of the index bounds of the array. So let's choose element 8. And here we go. So Java has thrown an exception. It tells us it's in the main thread. The exception is of type array index out of bounds, and it says index 8 out of bounds for length 6. And so our array of words only has 6 elements, and so we've tried to reference an index that does not exist. It attempts to tell us which line it's at, line 21. And if we look down here at line 21, we see that's essentially where we've referenced an out-of-bounds index. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is just sort of messy, and the whole program has crashed. And the user's not going to be expected to be able to read any of this. This is more for our eyes. And so how do we make it so that when the user references an index of the array, that it does not throw this error and that the program continues running? Well, this is where error handling comes into play. So let's go ahead and clear the screen. Now we want Java to actually handle that exception, or rather we want that when Java throws the exception that we catch it and then we handle it so that the program can continue running smoothly. And so how that's done is by using what's called a try catch block. And so down here I'm going to just write out the basic format of that. It's going to be try some code and catch some exception that we're going to call E, and then finally execute some code here. And so you can tell already this is the basic format of a method in Java. And so try is a method, and we're going to try some code in here. And if the code in fact does throw an exception, we're going to catch it with this line of the method. And you'll notice here that this method actually accepts parameters, and the parameter is going to be an object of type exception that we're going to reference as being E throughout the rest of this method. And so this tells us a lot about what exceptions are. Exceptions are actually objects in Java. And the background of this is that it does allow Java to keep better organized with the types of exceptions that are possible to be thrown. And because it's an object, that means that it has states and behavior. So that means we can actually do things with the exceptions that are thrown. And we'll get more into that a little bit later. But just for the scope of this project, the code that we're going to try that likely throws an exception will be caught in this part. We'll catch it as the object that it is, and we'll give it a name E that we're going to use to reference it. And we're also going to write the code here that will handle the exception and keep the program from crashing. And now this finally is going to be what happens after all said and done. And so this may be prompting the user to enter input one more time. This may be backtracking to another certain part of the program. This could be a lot here. And so when we try a code that throws an exception, and in the event that the exception is thrown, we catch it with this block of code. We label it as being E, which is an exception object. We handle the exception with some other code right here, like maybe asking, maybe letting the user know that there was an error. And then after all said and done, we finally execute this code, like perhaps asking the user to try inputting that one more time. And so let's go ahead and take this format here and try to weave it into the code that we've written to make it so that this doesn't throw an exception anymore. So inside of our getIt method, we're going to go ahead and print out to the user that we want them to choose an input, or we want them to choose an element. But before we actually accept that, we're going to go ahead and wrap that in a try block. We're going to try to set an integer that we're calling index equal to a next integer from the user. And then we're going to attempt to reference that in the array. But if that doesn't work, we're going to catch the exception object that we're going to call E. And now we're going to write out to the system there was an error happened. We're not going to crash it. We're not going to make it all messy and, not user friendly. We're just going to print out to the line, whoopsie, something happened there. Now the error still happened. We're not going to actually reference that element of the array, but rather than crash the whole program, we've actually done something that's going to be a little bit cleaner. We've let the user know, hey, something happened, it's not quite right, and then we're going to close out that and write our finally block and solicit the user to input that one more time. And we'll do that just by calling the getIt method one more time. It's going to be a recursive call to the same method that we're in. And so that should be everything. Let's go ahead and save that, and we're going to try running that. We'll recompile. It looks good, and then we'll run it. So now it's asking us to choose an element. Okay, 3, that's good. And because of the finally block, whether or not the error happens, it's actually calling the getIt method one more time. And so now we're kind of in this nice little loop. There's element 2, there's element 5, there's element 1. Okay, so now let's try to call element 8, which we know is going to be an array out of bounds error exception. And it throws us a whoopsie. And so it caught that exception, it didn't crash the program, it gave us the indication that there was an error, and then it used the finally block to go ahead and loop back to the method one more time, asking us once again for input. At which point we've chosen number 3, we've chosen number 1, we've chosen number 4, now we'll try number 11. Whoopsie, we got another one. Okay. And so hopefully this kind of makes it clear as to why error handling is an essential part of the operation and part of writing good Java code. It encapsulates all of the background context from the user, it makes it more clean and polished, and it gives the developer a chance to sort of make sure that they are handling the error in the way that they best see fit. Now, error handling can be very specific. You can handle a particular error, like you can specifically handle the array index out of bounds error, or if you know that there's going to be multiple errors thrown, you can have a special handle for each one of those errors, or you can just do a general, hey, something went wrong, not really sure what it was, and give the user an opportunity to try it again. And so hopefully this makes it clear. Hopefully it was fun and entertaining, and in the next video we will cover the file writing, which actually uses the error handling in order to operate correctly. So I can't wait to see everyone back again in the next video. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful night.